Hey, so this is a video tutorial on how to hook up your SPD-SX to MainStage. It looks a little long, but many of you probably won't even need the second half, and I've included links in the description to relevant sections so you can skip around to the parts that are more important to you if you need to. This tutorial is aimed at people who probably don't have a lot of experience with MainStage. I saw a lot of questions online about how to use SPD-SX with MainStage. Didn't see a lot of answers, but it's kind of led me to the conclusion that those asking that question probably just don't know a lot about MainStage. So while the first section of this video is about configuring the SPD-SX specifically, most of the video is actually kind of an introduction to MainStage. The last section of this video talks about kind of special use cases, as in if you want to have more than one MIDI controller, like you have a keyboard and you have an SPD-SX or a drum set generally. And it's about how to deal with that, because it took me a little bit of figuring out when I ran into that situation, so might as well put it up here. Go to Roland's website and get the driver for your computer. Mine is 10.13, so this is the driver I would get. You can also get the Wave Manager, but doesn't matter for this tutorial. I think the easiest way is to use Kit Init to erase one that's on there and get a blank slate. Go to Menu. Remember, this is going to erase this kit. I don't think it'll erase the wave files, but it'll erase all the configurations. So go to Menu, then make sure Kit is selected, which it already is. Enter, then hit Quick. And here you can go to Kit Init, which will do that. You can also change the name of it when you're done. Next thing you want to do is make sure that when you connect it via USB, it's sending audio and MIDI and is not set to Wave Manager. So go to Menu, then Setup, then obviously not MIDI, go to Option, and here it has USB mode, and you want it to say Audio MIDI. You can press these plus or minus to change it. Wave Manager is for when you want to use the Wave Manager app to load samples. So if you want to use the SPD-SX as an audio interface, either to get sound from the outside world into the computer, or take the sound from your computer and send it out to a speaker or a soundboard through the master out on the back of your SPD-SX, the problem I ran into the first time I took it out for a show is the audio level was super low coming out of it, and the sound guy said it was basically unusable. So thankfully I was able to fix it by setting the volume correctly, or higher, not necessarily correctly, but higher. So you can do that by going to Menu, then go to Sys, add audio in and out, and go to USB in volume, I think is what it was. Yeah, USB in volume. Okay, so if you have MainStage open, if this is your first time, it probably has you open up with something like keyboard or keyboards. Maybe just go to keyboards. All we're going to do is open up something and delete everything. So let's pick the simplest one. So let's go first to your layout here on your left. And just so that you guys understand the basic concept, let's get rid of everything. Also in Edit, let's delete. I clicked on this Edit tab. Click on this patch, Classic Electric Piano. Oops, don't click on it twice. Click on it once, make sure it's selected, and hit Delete. And we should have a fresh slate to deal with. I've hooked up the SPD-SX using the USB cable, and now I want to make sure that MainStage is receiving MIDI messages. So you can look at this MIDI in. I'm going to give a pat a whack. And yeah, it says it's sending, in my case, it's on channel 9. Yours should probably be on channel 10. Note G3, and we're getting an off message. We probably got an on message, but it flashed by so fast that we couldn't tell. To get a better view of, or a more informative view of the MIDI messages you're getting, you can go to Window and then the MIDI message monitor. And there we go. So we are getting the note on, right? Here's the time. The port was SPD-SX. That's the MIDI port, channel 9. Note on message, E3, velocity of 46. And then here comes the note off for the same one. If you, for whatever reason, get a million messages flashing by, go to Filters and start clicking on things So, you know, you can eliminate, for example, clock or other things that are real time and are constantly sending messages and make it hard for you to see things. Okay, so we just confirmed that our SPD-SX is successfully sending MIDI messages to MainStage. So the next step is to typically build a layout. Now, the larger concept of MainStage is that we're going to have a physical MIDI controller, which in this case is going to be our SPD-SX. We create a virtual representation in here in the layout, and then when we go to edit, we'll add patches, to which we'll add instruments in the channel strips, and we'll connect this virtual setup to notes or to instruments or to whatever we want here. Now, why go through this rigmarole? Why have this middleman of the layout? And the reason is it's very useful in that I'm going to hit pad, what is this, pad 3. Now, note that it's sending D#3 right now. With the layout, I can decide that I don't want D#3 to be sounded. I can change the note, or I can say I want this pad to change to a different patch. So that's the whole point of a layout. Now we're going to make a layout to be a virtual representation of our SPD-SX. So let's grab a drum pad and throw that in there. And now, like I said, we're going to have to hook up the SPD-SX to this pad, or one of our pads to this pad. So I'll hook up pad 1. The simplest way to often do this is just to, with this selected, click assign, give your pad a whack, and note what's happened here. It's automatically set these for us. It set this to SPD-SX is the port, channel 10. It's assigned it to the note that it sent. I would change the name so that they're logical. It's going to put them in the order it's going to number them in the order that you throw the screen control up there. So I would just be super specific about it. SPD-SX 1. And I also personally would have this display nothing. I don't know if you know, I saw what I did. Sorry. I think it was this, where it'll show a C#3, and, you know, it's going to change depending on what's going on. I just put nothing here because that's not super easy to see. And then I'll add a text on top of it. I'm trying to make this bigger. You guys might not be able to see super well what I'm about to do. So I'm going to drag this text right on top of there. Put it somewhere in the middle. I'll add a little asterisk here so it doesn't take up a lot of space. And I'm going to, sorry, let me make sure the text is selected. I'm going to click this to hide the frame around the text. Make this a little bit smaller. The reason I'm doing this is because, at least personally, when I use the SPD-SX, I'm often using it for musical theater, and I'll have a bunch of different settings, a bunch of different patches, so one pad could be different things in different patches. So in the patch, I'll go in here and change this to say what the instrument is. And the other pro tip that I learned the hard way, is to have the text be a little bit wider than the drum pad so that I can click on it separately, because if one's covering up the other, you won't be able to click on them independently. So after this one is set up, copy paste, line it up, and repeat until you get 9 pads. Okay, so we now have our 9 pads. I would also throw a background on it just to help it look nicer, have it more just makes things a little easier to see when you're playing. Throw a background up there. Come on, undo that. Let's give it a nice color. Okay, and the last step, which you don't have to do, is if you select it all, right click, either with a 2-finger tap or holding Control click, go to group, and now it makes it easier to move this thing. You can move it around as one unit. Okay, and we could stop here, but personally there's a couple things I would add to your layout. One thing I always add, this is from experience, is, sorry, not a drum pad, go to button, and we're going to add a panic button. I'm going to show you how to hook that up right now. Go to edit, go to concert, make sure concert is selected, click on the button, actions, panic. What that'll do is it'll reset your MIDI. Sometimes if the computer kind of gives a burp, then it'll receive the note on messages but won't receive the note off. So all of a sudden you hear and it's very loud depending on your volume. It won't stop and everybody wonders what the heck is your problem. You can hit the panic and it'll reset everything. Okay, back to business. The other thing I would add, just personally, some type of patch list. You can add a little selector, or you can add compact patch list, and this will just show you which patch you're on. Once you go adding patches here, they're going to show up in this list, and it's very useful. But lastly, you should know that you don't have to do this every time you do a concert. If you're still on the layout tab, go here and you can export layout, and you can save this layout so you can pull it in anytime you want. The only thing you want to know is if you're going to use this, if you're going to import a layout, which you could see right there by export, next time you start a concert, it'll warn you, but it's an action you can't undo. So I would do it first thing and then start messing with it. Otherwise, if you get halfway through building a concert and then you import the layout, you just created some extra work for yourself. Now we have the layout set up, and we're going to make sure that all of these pads are assigned, are connected with our SPD-SX. So I'll do just kind of like I showed you before, but just once more in case someone skipped ahead. Click on the pad, click on assign, give that pad a whack, and you're good to go. And you can keep clicking this and going down the line and resetting them. Now, I want to show you one thing. If for whatever reason the assign isn't happening super easily, or if it's happened to me before where you have some type of continuous message coming in, like I bump my expression pedal and it's going to assign this pad to expression or to the continuous controller without you meaning to, and you just can't hit the button fast enough, you can totally configure this without using the assign. All you do is click on this and go here and set what you need to. So we know that this pad 7, is sending F#3. So I would go here, SPD-SX, channel 10, F#3, give it a different name. I'm going to have to rename all these. And you're good to go. So I'll just do the rest of them the old-fashioned way. Okay, and I'm just going to rename these to make sure they're all consistently named. One thing you want to do to make sure sound is coming in and going out of the right place, you always do this when you start up MainStage, but go to Preferences, Audio, which is just getting a shortcut to one of these tabs, and make sure your audio input is going the right place and audio output vice versa. If you're using the SPD-SX as your audio interface, as in you're taking the audio from your virtual instruments, sending them to the SPD-SX, and then plugging a cable into the master out, you would want your audio output to be the SPD-SX. In my case, I'm using my mixer. Audio input, sure, SPD-SX, why not? Apply changes. And you should be good to go. Okay, so we've made a layout and we've hooked up the SPD-SX to this layout. Let's add some instruments to play. If you go to Edit, Untitled Concert, hit plus to add a new patch, and here we can add an instrument. There's a couple different ways of doing this. I'm going to start with the simplest way and then go on to more complex cases. But you could, for example, just go to your patch library and let's add a marimba. And MainStage, Apple's pretty good about plug and play, so this should sound. Again, if it's not sounding, make sure that you've checked your preferences and looked at audio and make sure everything's coming out where you expect it to come out. I'm gonna burp. You're welcome. So now let's say we want to add another instrument on this same patch, so we can play them both at the same time. Let's go to Channel Strips, hit plus. We'll leave it at instrument for software instrument. MIDI input, we'll talk about this later, but right now let's put it at none. And then create. Let's put like a synthesizer on there or something. While bass, let's do a lead because E3 is fairly high up there. Alien lead, what's that sound like? All right, so we have this selected. We click here and it adds a channel strip here. It added a retro synth plugin. Oh, cool. I don't think I've messed with that. But either way, we got this. Check out the MIDI input here. We have none. So right now, if we hit the SPD-SX, only the marimba is actually connected to the SPD-SX. So what we can do is we can click on a pad, and here where it says unmapped, we can connect it to many different things. So let's say we wanted to play a note on alien lead. We can go click on alien lead, MIDI notes. Let's have it play, I don't know, C2 or something. And of course nothing happens. Oh, there it is. I'm not sure why it's not happening every time, but it is happening. So I realized after I made the video why this thing wasn't sounding for the alien lead, and it's because the note off came so fast that it didn't have time to sound. But it'll work for one-shot instruments like percussion, or it'll work for that other instrument if you went in and edited it, but that's for another video. Beauty. So notice it stopped playing the marimba. We're not getting any movement here, but it is playing alien lead, which is what we want. So all these are marimba, all this is alien lead. So note that we added this by clicking on this and going down here and finding a destination. You could also do that manually with assignments and mappings. Note that it added this entry here. What we just added right now by doing that shows up here. Marimba, alien lead. So patches, marimba, alien lead, MIDI, note C2. Another good thing to know is that you can add an additional mapping, so you can have the pad go multiple places. So I clicked on this, and earlier we set it here under unmapped. Like say, let's see, if it was originally like this, same as input unmapped, we could send it to alien lead, MIDI note F7. Let's do something a little lower. Let's do I don't know, B0. What's that sound like? Nice. Go to mappings. Let's do the same thing here. Click the plus, and let's add a marimba note too. Let's add an F just to keep it dissonant. I don't know, F. Why can I never see this? There we go. So now it's actually sounding both at a time. Sweet. Now if we wanted to delete that assignment, there's a couple ways you could do it. You can click on this, go to same as input, or go to block so that it does nothing. If we go to same as input, it'll send it back to the marimba. So if we put it back on alien lead, MIDI note, whatever. Whew. The other way you could do it is by going to the assignments and mappings, finding it, and deleting it, hitting delete. So another thing you can note is that you can use these pads to do things other than send note messages to instruments. You can use it to kind of do little tasks for you. Like something I often do is hook a pad up to advancing to the next patch. So I hit this and it'll go to the next patch I have set up. And with that in mind, something you should really know if you're new to MainStage is that there's what they talk about with concert level, and they talk about patch level, or they talk about set level if you wanted to add a set, which is just another way of organizing your patches. Is that if I were to do something at the concert level, that's essentially like global level if you guys have done any programming. So anything I add here will apply to anything below it, to all of the patches, to all of the sets, and to all of the patches. So in the case of wanting to go to the next patch, I want to put that here because I don't want to have to program it every time I add another patch. I just want this to, every time I hit it, change to the next patch. So I'm going to make sure concert level is selected, not set or not patch level in this case. Concert level is selected, hit this, and you can go to actions, and let's go to the next patch. And so now let's see if I add a patch, add an instrument, doesn't matter what it is, percussion, orchestral kit, sure. Let's see what that, beauty. So now, every time I hit this, it will change to the next patch, as you can see. If you mostly just wanted to play drum sets in MainStage, one thing to consider would be to actually go into the SPD-SX itself and change the notes that each pad sends. So what I'm talking about here is if you go and search for GM standard drum map, you can get something like this from Wikipedia, which is the source of all knowledge. And most manufacturers of virtual instruments follow this somewhat. So note 36, C1 is probably going to be bass drum. And so you can go into your SPD-SX and pick this or pick an external kick pad that you hooked in and change the MIDI note that it sends to send 36. So that way, if you're in a concert, and if you have a concert set up where you just have a bunch of drum sets, you don't have to actually go in and map each pad individually. It'll automatically be linked to play the correct note for the drum set. And if you want to make sure, let's add a new patch and show you one thing. Let's put a drum set on here. If you don't want to bother looking up the standard drum map, so we added Brooklyn. Go into this drum kit here. Actually, you don't need to do that. Well, you could do this to tinker around with it, but what you want to do is go to Window, Musical Typing, and find the note you want to send. And you can look it up and see what number it actually is, because each note has two ways of being identified. It could either be C1, for example, which is the bass drum, or I think it was, 36, 35, 36. So if you know you're only going to be playing certain notes, or you're going to be playing just a bunch of drum sets, it might be easier for you to change the MIDI notes sent on the SPD-SX, and then you'll have less assigning to do in the pads if you want to override that default and change a pad to do something else. To change the MIDI note sent by one of the pads, go to Menu, make sure Kit is selected, and then right there you can see there's MIDI note. And you can press plus or minus to change its value. You can press the arrow buttons to edit different pads, or you can just hit the pad as well. Another thing I wanted to show you guys is if you have it could be, actually I think this is even more useful if you have an electric kit that you're hooking up. If you have an electric kit or an SPD-SX and you have another keyboard, it took me kind of a while to figure out a good way to link each keyboard or each MIDI instrument into a specific channel. It's just kind of the most efficient way to do it. And after a little bit of tinkering, I realized one thing. So let's look at the marimba we added. We'll click on the marimba patch. We could rename the patch to something else since it's not just marimba, but if we click on the marimba strip, look at MIDI input, we have it set to keyboard 2 missing because I was tinkering around and I added it. So since I did this video out of order, this just says keyboard 2. If I had never added a keyboard ever, it would just say keyboard, even though there's no keyboard visible on the screen. And that's because MainStage is going to add a keyboard, kind of an invisible keyboard for you automatically. And if we added our own keyboard, again, let's say in this case, right, let's say we have a drum set here. We want this to go to drum set without any assigning of individual pads, and we want a keyboard to go to a different instrument. The easiest way to do that is, well, let's add that keyboard. Say here we go. It's like we had an actual physical MIDI keyboard controller. Let's give this guy a name. Yeah, keyboard 1, that's fine. The easiest way to keep these two separate, I think, without having to go in and program every single pad, is to add a tiny little keyboard here. Now, just to make our lives a little easier, let's select this bad boy. Right-click it, ungroup. I'll get rid of the pitch bend, get rid of the mod wheel. Change the number of keys to the smallest possible. Resize it. Resize the background it's on. And just tuck this guy away somewhere. So I'll rename this SPD-SX or drumset keyboard because I'm thinking this is more useful for electric drum sets. And we'll restrict it to that drum sets channel, which is probably going to be 10. This one, we will restrict it to channel 1. So now when we're adding, or editing instruments, let's say if we go on this patch, which has a drum set, let's have a drum set and like a vibraphone. Now we have two options for MIDI input. So I'm about to add a vibraphone. I want that to be the keyboard. Channel strip library, mallet vibraphone. And let's go back into the Brooklyn patch. Look, they even showed you that right now we're about to play both at the same time. I would think. Yep, there we go. Go to Brooklyn, go to MIDI input, and set that to the SPD-SX keyboard. So, all these notes are too high. They're not going to sound on the drum set. But, you know, if I had reprogrammed these to send to C1, for example, it would be playing the drum set. So that was my much too long video on how to use the SPD-SX with MainStage. I hope somebody can find some use for it. Later.